We are honored to have the great good fortune to have my dear old friend Jessy-Kate Schinger on this. And let's see, we in the past have sort of done this as kind of loose interview Q&A, like interview then followed by general Q&A. But the idea is you would do most of the talking. And so I guess perhaps since the space group will concentrate on the space-oriented aspects of your many endeavors. But perhaps you could just start with a little bit about your history, particularly your history as it pertains to space activities. I believe I met you in like 2007 or something like that, but you were already at NASA by that time. So maybe we go back a little.
That's the beginning of history, Creon. There's nothing before meeting you. Okay, well, let's see. So my background in the space community really started when I went to the UN. The UN has a meeting that they hold every 15 years on the peaceful uses of outer space. And it's put on by the UN's kind of international body that deals with peaceful uses of outer space. It's called the Committee on the Peaceful Uses of Outer Space. And I sort of like stumbled into that by accident as a fairly young, like sort of just graduating high school kid. And there I met a bunch of folks who are really passionate about, using space to think about the future of humanity. And through that, I got involved in starting a sort of young people's group that advises that UN body. And that got me involved with space policy. So throughout my undergraduate years I was studying astrophysics, but I was working for the Canadian government doing space security policy on the side. And that got me involved in, a group called Pugwash. And Pugwash is this sort of like, I don't know, it's a very illustrious kind of organization that was involved in arms control in the Cold War and brought together international scientists in the USSR and in the United States primarily. And after the work that they did there, they sort of branched out into other fields. So from nuclear weapons work, disarmament work, they moved into like biological security, weapons security, and chemical weapons security, and space security. And let's see. So that sort of space policy work led me to eventually meeting yet another illustrious person who many of us on this call already know, including Matt and John and Creon, who's Pete Worden. And Pete has sort of been a mentor to many folks in the space community. And Pete was being, let's say, transitioned from being an Air Force general to working in Congress to being the center director at NASA's Research Center. And so he sort of hired a bunch of us to be official troublemakers, I would say. Like he kind of was like, come work for me, and I'm going to put you in a group over here, and you just do what you like. And we were like, what does that mean? We've never worked for the government before. And he was like, don't worry about it. We'll figure it out. And so we went and started working on some projects at NASA Ames in California. That's where I met Creon.
Okay. Well, I want to pause right there, since now we're to the point that I actually know something about directly. Great. And I want to mention that it's kind of fun. I'll try to keep it brief. When I met Jessy, I also met a bunch of other let's call them Pete's entourage that he brought to Ames with him, which was probably about 20 people, including several on this call, like Matt Daniels and I'm not sure, and John Karsh, he's on the call. Anyway, and excuse me if I'm skipping you, but what happened?
Larry too.
Well, Pete did not bring Larry. Larry, like me, and Carol, was already at Ames, and kind of thanks to Carol and Larry, Carol, who informed me of these secret parties going on at the golf course, I came and I sort of inserted myself into Jesse's and Pete Worden's friend group, the new cool kids who'd come to Ames, and sort of, I don't know, fooled them into being my friends and letting me live with them and all these other things. And, it's very happy time since then, greatly rewarding. I consider them my family, basically. And So, full disclosure, Jesse and I lived together at the same house for many years, and with a bunch of these other people, and a bunch of these people founded Planet Labs, which I joined fairly shortly after it started. And yeah, so that's just to say a little bit about why Jesse, but really why Jesse, mostly I think on this call, is what happened. You came to NASA, you did some things, and then you left and you did a bunch of other things. And maybe you could talk about those NASA things.
Well, yeah, I mean, I'm just looking around at the people in this room too, and thinking that there's like a few themes that could be really interesting to chat about. Um, this is a space interested group, right? So the work that I've done in the space world cuts across kind of I don't work on space security much anymore, but I worked on kind of trying to prevent the weaponization of outer space for a while, and I know several people on this call have been involved in those initiatives. I currently work on lunar exploration, and that's looking at sort of a combination of policy and governance questions through to kind of like technology that we might be able to deploy to create public services and utilities in the lunar environment. And then similarly, sort of thinking a lot about um, there's a term that I'm playing around with, so it would be fun to discuss it in this group as well. But it's a bit more nascent, and it's exploring the idea of human geography and how it might apply to the what we call like the cislunar realm. And thinking about the role of like maps and mapping and the stories we tell with the maps that we make. So I don't know. Those are just a few themes that I think folks on this call would be sort of certainly great to hear other perspectives on this topic.
Okay, that's great. And so let's maybe after that we could transition to a little about Astra and a little about Open Lunar and anything else you want to talk about. I do want to mention one thing while I got Allison and Finan on the line and all of these people. I realized that almost everybody that I know on this call who hasn't yet been featured as a speaker in this group would be a worthy I'm the interlocutor, would be a worthy person to give a talk for this group. So if we want to increase the cadence of this group, as we talked about, and if we want to get a selection of speakers who are probably mostly, willing to submit to this kind of interrogation, we could take almost everybody who's on this call who hasn't spoken. I'm thinking of, John Walker, and John Karsh, and Leakey, and Jonathan Dowell, and Larry, and Carol, and Matt Daniels, of course, and other people who I don't know. Anyway, we're gonna extend invitations to all of you and try to figure out how to work you in. So great. Okay, and Luke and all sorts of people. Anyway, let's keep going. So what happened then? Yeah, would you talk a little bit about your work after you left NASA, or maybe more about while you were at NASA, if you care to? Well, it's a while ago.
Brianna, you in the space realm specifically.
Yeah. And, related stuff like this human geography thing, maybe that'd be interesting to hear a little more about. That sounds weird and unfamiliar.
Awesome. Let's see. So, after leaving, well, at NASA, I worked on sort of like a few different themes. One was this idea that our friend George Whitesides introduced early days in our space collaborations. He was really interested in the idea of participatory exploration, and this is like the early aughts where social media
George Whitesides should be someone we loop into this stuff, who has been the CEO of Virgin Galactic, I believe, for some time, and certainly that's participatory.
Right, and was the head of NSS for a while, and he was always really passionate, always has been really passionate about getting more people involved in space exploration. So he was talking about this idea of participatory exploration, and when we got to Ames, we were like, why don't we do that? What does that even look like? And so we started to do kind of more activities that would cross the divide of inside and outside NASA. And so we threw a giant rave and a Yuri's Night rave and Hangar for a couple of years. It was many thousands of people in front and Burning Man art, and brought people onto sort of like the federal facility to expose them to like what the NASA Center is like. And we had talks and we had all this stuff. but we held lectures, sort of salon type lectures in San Francisco to get people excited about what NASA was up to. We created NASA's first Twitter accounts, and of course, got in lots of trouble for that. And we created an island in Second Life, and we had Pete come and give a talk as a animated avatar of himself with a staff, and I think we had to code up some goats or something like that because Pete had he had some goats or Shiba Inus.
I have a whole session on the goats, but that's another thing. Look at the Wiki page if you want to see the goats. Yeah, and then oh wow, those were the days. Yuri's night, Ames and all that stuff.
So,
yep.
Yeah.
And then you left and you had a bunch of different space related stints after NASA, right?
Yeah. So I several years after leaving NASA, I'd been sort of like not working in the space world for some time, but I decided I was ready to come back. And a friend of mine, Chris, I had just started the company Astra, which is a rocket company based in Alameda here in California. And then I was like, Chris, I think it's time for me to write some software again. And he was like, great. I only have one other software developer working on our rockets right now. Come work with us. And so I went to Astra only for about a year and a half. But while I was there, I worked on, I would say for the first sort of like 6 months or so, I worked on the ground software. So we were basically processing all of the data coming off of the rocket, building dashboards for it, and creating the dashboards that you would use to watch the health and status of the rocket before and leading up to the launch itself. And then after some time, I realized it was really fun to work on the embedded systems on the rocket itself. So I transferred over to the rocket side and worked on the distributed system on the rocket, and sort of stayed with Astra through almost through the first launch, but definitely long enough to see my code be that source of, let's say, aborted launches several times, and staying up many late nights to solve bugs and really fun things like that. It was really good times. But after about a year and a half, we had also been just starting these conversations about the Open Lunar Foundation, and Open Lunar. Astra, was a commercial project to work on, launching things into space. I thought that was really fun technically, but Open Lunar really stood for and stands for something that is like very, very close to my heart, which is thinking about positive precedent setting in lunar activities. And we were doing both technology and policy, and I was like, I can't, I just can't, not put my whole heart and soul into this project. So I decided to go work on Open Lunar full time, and that's what I'm still doing.
Great. So perhaps you could tell us something about Open Lunar and what it is and what it's done and what it's going to do.
Sure. So Open Lunar, as I said, I think we're probably the only organization in the world focused or dedicated to positive precedent setting in the lunar domain. Again, several people on this call have been and are involved in this project. Angeliki, pretty much on a daily basis, is collaborating with us. But we work with a lot of folks as well. When I say about Open Lunar, we really started off focusing on, again, technology development. We were building an open source lander to go to the moon. We about a year and a half or 2 years ago, we released an open source lander design that you can go find on our website. During the pandemic, we really focused, I think, more heavily on our positions around kind of governance and policy and what values we want to bring to the work that we do in lunar exploration. We do also do a lot of bread and butter policy work. We write op-eds. We participate again in that committee I mentioned at the UN called COPUS, the Committee on the Peaceful Use of Outer Space. And we look at things like the Artemis Accords and the Artemis program, and what kinds of precedents will be getting set by the return to the moon, as well as commercial activities and the ways in which the private sector sort of operates often in a gray area, not well covered by existing sort of coordination agreements or rules and regulations. And then we're particularly interested, as I mentioned a few minutes ago, in the idea of public utilities for the moon. And we think public utilities are this kind of like really interesting intersection between being an actor in the lunar environment in order to sort of have a seat at the table once these precedents are being set.
Right.
But public utilities are, I'll just finish this one thing and I'll let you ask this question. But public utilities are, in addition, it's like, who is the public? And at the moon, there's no government, there's no nation states at the moon. And so the question of who is the public means that we have an opportunity to kind of invite people into governance and decision making around those services that are being offered. And so we've been focusing on like communications, utilities related to communications. And we have a few research projects going on about that right now. I can talk more about that. Sorry, Brianna, go ahead.
Yeah, well, I guess what I wanted to say was, so as I understand it, having been sort of a lurker in the Open Lunar situation for some years, the idea, correct me if I'm wrong, or one idea is that, we have governments, right? And they're all doing various things having to do with the moon, flags and footprints and gateways and all this kind of stuff. And then we have, some amount of competition and some amount of collaboration between these government actors. We also have private companies, SpaceX possibly, and a bunch of companies that are doing various things with and without the government for cislunar stuff. But we don't really have, aside from maybe the UN peripherally, was a sort of public, nonprofit, non-government, non-commercial set of actors at the table. And so as I understand it, one of the main purposes of Open Lunar was to right that balance and bring these types of voices, opinions, and priorities into the lunar development discussions and activities. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think that's a nice way to put it. One of the things we're really interested in is sort of like multi-stakeholder process. If you look at, formal multilateral process, it tends to be very much centered on nation states. But if you look at something like the internet and the way the internet is governed, we have institutions like ICANN, the Internet Corporation for Assigned Names and Numbers. We've got the IETF, we've got IRTF, and these are what would more generally be called multi-stakeholder organizations, where you have like technical experts, academics, private sector entities, and governments kind of show up to the table as peers. And there is nothing like that really happening in the space world, especially the sort of exploration focused world at the moment. And we'd like to see a little bit more of that.
Very cool. Very cool. So, so let's see, where is Open Lunar right now? Like, who are you? Where are you? What's on your list of priorities that you can reasonably expect to achieve over the next year or two?
So we're about 6 people at the moment. We work remotely, so we're kind of all over the world. One of the things we've worked really hard to do is, despite being sort of incorporated in the United States, we work hard to have an international team and sort of participate in international conversations. So our main kind of areas of focus, as I mentioned, are in this realm of public utilities. I guess we sort of have a baseline layer of policy work. So we've been focused in a policy realm on property rights for the moon. I can pause on that for a second and explain that because of the Outer Space Treaty, that I think, again, most people on this call are probably familiar with, the Article 2 of the Outer Space Treaty says that there shall be no national appropriation in outer space. And what that sort of like amounts to is basically that there's an nation state appropriation of land and territory, and so that's one of the key tenets of sovereignty as we understand it in the international system. It means it's effectively functions as a commons. And
well, wait a second. Let me ask a clarifying question. This time when I think a number of us at Ames were looking into possibly advocating for updates or amendments to this treaty, or at least agreements on, as lunar activity was heating up again after a long hiatus. as I understand it, while the Outer Space Treaty does not allow for people to claim territory on celestial bodies, and I suppose in outer space in general, it does allow them to exploit resources on those celestial bodies, including for profit. Is that correct? So like I can set up mining on the moon. I just can't stop you from mining in the same place unless you're going to like be destroying my stuff. That's not allowed.
Yeah, well, I mean, I can say some comments on this, and I'll also invite anybody else on the call who's been involved in these things. Matt, Angeliki, Jonathan, sure, many of you could add to this, but the short answer is it's not specified in the Outer Space Treaty, and so the specific text says that there shall be no national appropriation. It also refers to exploitation and use, and so there's some debate, but generally speaking, increasingly, I'd say the position of nation states is that it would agree with you, is that we can uh, extract, exploit, and use resources in space, and that sort of like it's not a far jump to think that therefore you could also own those resources. But there are some countries, like Germany, for example, that feel that you should be able to do sort of exploitation, exploration, and use, but only through governments, and that you shouldn't be allowed to have commercial activity. So in the past, sort of, I think since 2015, the United States, I think, was the first country to sign into law um, um, a law that said that they would support companies who claimed ownership over extracted resources. And a few other countries, Luxembourg, Japan, I think UAE, have signed similar laws now.
Really, yeah,
but it's not homogenous. Like it's not harmonized across countries.
It does seem, and I'm no, international lawyer, but it does seem to me that like if I make a company and we go and we mine water on the moon to be used as, the profit making propellant that we're going to sell to or use ourselves or sell to other companies, like it would be a pretty far stretch to say the Outer Space Treaty allows for some other country to come and take that from me. It's like that's
Yeah.
almost act of war
Right.
or act of aggression.
Right. I mean, I think the interesting thing is actually more like, given that there are some absurdities implied by, let's say, not allowing some of these things, what, practically speaking, will be the approach that we take to having a sort of like clear and coherent set of expectations for people. So maybe an analogy could be like, the oceans. Although there's many differences between the oceans or the high seas and outer space, there's some similarities too. And in the high seas, we have something called the International Seabed Authority, and there is a sort of approach to what mining in the deep seabed, like how you say, hey, I'm going to mine here. How we allocate priority rights to, because these are big expeditions, like you pointed out, like mining is not a trivial thing in the oceans, nor will it be on.
Oh, we lost Jesse. All right. Well, while we get Jesse back, let's just say that yes, as someone's pointed out in the chat, and as Jesse just
yeah, we lost brothers. Yeah, just saying that it's a long initiative. Like there'll be a lot of years of planning, and so you need to figure out what does it mean to actually say, well, I'm planning to go and do this operation, and how do you manage that coordination such that it doesn't lead to appropriation, but that it does create a sort of like sustainable and confident environment for operators.
So we have an interesting thread going in the chat here, which I'm wondering if you might speak to, or anyone really who might know a thing or two, Jonathan McDowell or someone. Like, we do have this whole not only body of law, but sort of body of precedent and set of activities that take place on the high seas, not just resource extraction, but rules of conduct, and navigation, and communications, and registration. And we have private actors, we have government actors. I mean, somehow this sort of seems to work. And to what extent is that stuff legally applicable to outer space? And to what extent do you think it's pragmatically extendable to outer space without a lot of modification? Or are there differences?
so I'll say a couple brief things and then invite others to comment on it too. So I see the hands up. It's not legally applicable to space, as in, yeah, legally you wouldn't say it apply. It doesn't officially apply to space, but there are some interesting sort of analogies to look at there, and many people are looking at them. Practically speaking, there are ideas such as priority rights that I think we will need to solve, and that are very relevant for what we're doing in space.
All right. So before
Go
we
ahead.
go, oh, sorry,
I'm sorry.
before we go, before we go to audience stuff, John and Carol's got something to say. I just wanted to finish up with Open Lunar and say, so do you have anything more to say about like what your plans are for the medium-term future and what your challenges are?
Sorry, I'm typing in the chat. That has the treaty on it. That's nice to look at. So what else are we looking at? So yeah, we have this big body of work that we've been doing around resource management and property rights in space. That was a very big focus last year. We one of the things we're doing right now is we have a project to actually demonstrate purchasing regolith, which is the term for lunar soil, in situ on the lunar surface. And we're doing that in order to essentially provoke the question of ownership and transfer, and like what we even mean by holding, rights, title, and interest on the lunar surface. So we have an entity that we set up called Breaking Ground Trust, and that trust is executing these purchases and sort of working with some other commercial actors to think about demonstrations of repurposing, of disposal, of recycling on the lunar surface. And it's a really neat project. I'll put the link in the chat, but it's weird because it's sort of like it's its own legal entity that is this trust structure. And we get to play with experimenting with ownership on the lunar surface. So we're having a lot of fun with that. And then, as I mentioned, besides our policy work, we were looking at a couple of concepts related to lunar communications as obviously an extension of an area on Earth where there has been a lot of openness and cooperation that we think could be really exciting to see extended to the moon. And so there's an initiative. I mean, there are initiatives right now being led by NASA, by ESA. Angelique knows a lot about this, to kind of extend networking architectures around the moon. But there's a lot of other questions as well. And
on that regard, I want to just shift gears briefly and then come to audience Q&A and open discussion. So briefly, I want to just mention, as many of you probably know, regarding communications architectures on the moon and regarding the Artemis programs, we recently had what appears to be a successful launch of the first Artemis mission, as I understand it. The what was it called again? It just went up like 2 days ago.
What, yesterday? Capstone.
Capstone. Yeah. So people might want to look that up on Wikipedia, et cetera. It's very interesting. It's going to go into this halo orbit and sort of prototype some technologies that are going to be required for lunar comms architecture, as well as some of the other more extensive things that the Artemis program has on its agenda. Yeah. Like Gateway and that sort of thing. I don't know. We don't have Alex, John Karst or anyone else. Matt, do you have anything to say about A, about Capstone, and B, I want to extend briefly. We have a number of people on this call who are new faces. We have Matt Daniels, we have Angelique, I think hasn't been here that much before, I'm not sure. We have Liz Parrish, I see, and some people I don't know, like Gianna and John Chisholm, who haven't self-introduced on previous talks. Anyone who hasn't self-introduced, maybe we could just go through and have you give a minute, and I'm going to call them out. Since John has his hand raised, maybe we'll start with you, John.
Okay. Well, can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you.
I'm thrilled to be here. I've been part of Foresight Institute, or I first wrote about them in my column in Unix Review back in the early 1990s, as Christine Peterson will recall. Um, this is, I think, my first session with this group, and I'm thrilled to be here, and I've really enjoyed the discussion. I'm most interested in, as I said in the chat, in legal regimes, and that is, let's say that I have a solar panel on the moon, and a vehicle comes by that kicks up dust that reduces the effectiveness of my panel. Um, is that something the vehicle has a right to do, or are they liable to me? Um, and there's no way. The number one point I would make is there's no way that we, a 250,000 miles away, can resolve these matters just by directly extrapolating from our experience on Earth. It's more akin, actually, to the peeping Tom question. When is it unreasonable for a peeping Tom to peep into someone's window? If I'm right up to the window, obviously that's not right. But what if I'm a mile away? And also, it's technology dependent. What's the body of law and the regime which allows decisions and resolutions of these kinds of conflicts to evolve organically? It's common law. Common law isn't determined by the top down. It evolves from the bottom up by a huge database of cases that are resolved by some jury or some judge. And so that's the kind of legal regime I think we're eventually going to need as soon as there is either significant commerce on the moon or a significant population on the moon. I've written about this, and I'd be happy to say more about it, but I'll just leave it there.
Okay, great. Thanks for being brief. I appreciate it. Let's move down the line here. I don't think I see Bernd on the call. It's not the first time. Bernd, did you introduce ever on one of these calls before? And if not, would you like to briefly?
Sure. Yes. Glad. So yeah, I'm Bernd, born and raised in Eastern Germany. I've been in the US now for 20 years. I'm an IT architect, enterprise architect. I've been lucky enough throughout the years to be involved in, technology forefront. So basically it was part of the company who first challenged Amazon to build some bookstores way back when the internet bubble was something that people got excited about. I'm now recently involved in a lot of new IT development that challenge, the way we think about artificial intelligence, the way that we think. Everybody heard about this silly discussion about this sentience, Google AI, so whatever you might think about that. I have my own opinion. I think it's okay that they fire that person. Anyway, he should ask his money back for his education. Anyway, so I'm very interested in space exploration, machine learning, artificial intelligence is close to my heart, life extensions. I'm very flattered to be in this group, and I'm mostly listening. If anybody has any question about, IT and where that is going, more than happy to answer any question. Thank you.
Great. And full disclosure, Bernd also happens to be recently my next door neighbor. That's how we know each other, actually. But
anyway, about that too.
And next I see John Walker. Have you done self-introduction to this group yet or not?
Yes, at the very first time.
Oh, okay. Well, then we're going to have to skip you. Sorry. Can have a lot to say about John Walker if we'll get him on stage. He's got a big history in private space endeavors and stuff like that, and sort of the previous generation of private rocket companies and such. It'd be very interesting to hear from him. Let's see. Jonathan Dowell, have you done self-introduction in this group before?
Yes, I believe I did an earlier one. So
all right. So we'll skip you there. Okay, cool. And Larry, I know, has done it. And I think John Karsh, you've done it too. If not, you can unmute. Albert David Landowski, what about you? I don't know. You're muted.
Yeah, now it should be better, I suppose. That's all. Yeah, being unmuted helps a lot. So yeah, it's my second call on this group. Well, I'm working on the cybersecurity solutions, mainly for space and defense sector. I'm also involved My main focus is on the engineering side, but during my free time, I can call it something like this. I also supported building Space Life Science, a kind of venture capital in Europe. And I'm also involved in the European Space Foundation. So regarding the lunar exploration, currently we are working on the one solution which is responsible on mapping directly the resources for space mining companies. So yeah, I can tell that I'm also working on the thing which is about developing the whole value chain. And in the September, during European Rover Challenge, I will lead the discussion about building the space economy. Well, in fact, from that moment, with great perspectives.
All right, thank you for being here. And Angeliki, have you introduced yourself yet?
Hi, Krian. Yeah, I believe I introduced myself at the first meeting we had at Christmas time, but happy to do it.
All right, well, thanks. We'll bring you on board to talk about your activities at some point. And Victoria, I don't believe I know you, but lovely to see you here. Would you mind saying a few words?
Yeah, sure. My name is Victoria Ustimenko. I'm global head of markets at TFDF. It's the international non-government organization that provides innovations inside Africa. I have also my own PR agency, which work with startups. I know, according to Liz Parrish, is also the advisor in the advisory board of TFDS. And right now, I'm very pleased that and grateful that I am present with you, with such prominent people inside the community of Foresight Institute. I'm a rare person because we will organize the conference in the South Africa this August, where will be presented a lot of futurists. So it's like I'm a volunteer. It's my volunteer work there. But thank you for the invitation and the great conversation, because I'm very fond of NASA and space traveling.
All right.
We registered and said on Mars inside, so all these tickets get you to Mars or get you to Moon.
Okay. All right. Sorry, we'll get back to Jesse shortly. I just want to do 2 more or 3 more. If Matt Daniels is actually available to unmute, perhaps he could do a very brief intro, because he's a rare.
Sure. I'm home with COVID right now, so that will time limit my speaking, if anything. I'm currently at the White House in OSTP, Office of Science and Technology Policy. But before that, I've been at something called the Office of Net Assessment, which does kind of long-term thinking for the US Department of Defense. And I've been connected to MIT Lincoln Lab and on the faculty at Georgetown, and have been connected to NASA in various roles for a long time.
Yeah, right. And Matt and I are old friends, as well as many others on this call back from the Ames days. And I see we got Chris Hatfield gracing us. Say a few words, Chris. Welcome.
Hey, Creon, good to see you. I know a few of the folks online, and I can only stay on for 20 minutes. I have something else at the top of the hour. My apologies. But my background is in, I was a military pilot and a test pilot and an astronaut, and flew in space 3 times and commanded the space station and did some spacewalks. And I was NASA's director in Russia. And then since then, I've worked a lot in space business. I help with a bunch of different space companies. I run a space tech incubator. I work with a foundation that Jesse is super pivotal in the Open Lunar Foundation. I chair the board of that. And then I'm also an author, and I spent the morning, in fact, working on my 5th book. They're all space related. My last one and the one that I'm working on now are thriller fiction books in the space genre. And those 2 books are being made into 2 of them are being made into TV series right now. So all kinds of cool stuff going on, but lots of space crossover.
Yeah, and I want to mention that Chris is also, in addition to everything else he said, one of the world's most inspirational speakers on topic space, and both from a personal and a more objective policy perspective. And anyway, I'm being harassed to get back to Jesse. So we're going to have to defer some of the rest of you, Liz and others, till another time. So please come back to future sessions. We're at almost 45 minutes, which I think might be the official cutoff, but we are allowed to continue to the hour, I believe. Right, Allison? And so, look, since we're going to get back to Jessy, I'm going to have to ask, does Jessy have more she wants to say, or does anyone have any dialogue questions they want to instigate with Jessy at this point?
We could, I'd be happy to keep talking about the kind of legal and policy environment on the moon. It sounds like there's some interest in this group here, but we also, of course, have, some themes around that include things like registration, which Jonathan is, very involved with and knowledgeable about. So there's something called the Registration Convention that applies to outer space activities. And
what's that?
It's one of the 5 treaties that apply to outer space, and it basically says that nation states will register their activities, things that they launched into space or that they are sort of control in outer space, and that has worked reasonably well for let's say for Earth orbit activities, but we don't have a good mechanism to extend that to lunar activities or lunar surface activities, and so it's a sort of a very active conversation in the lunar community right now. I don't know if you want to say anything about that.
Well, I want to ask a question to you or anyone, which is regarding these 5 treaties. Are there any major spacefaring nations that are not signatories to these treaties?
No, I think there's. I don't remember the exact number. Sorry, I shouldn't say no categorically, but the Outer Space Treaty is sort of the dominant treaty, and it's really the umbrella treaty, if you will. And I think there's something like roughly 100 nation states that have signed on to that treaty. So it's really kind of considered very much the treaty governing these activities. The registration and other conventions are less. Slightly less signatories, but still very much universally accepted.
Question on that, if anybody knows, maybe Matt or someone, when you have changes in the existence of nation states and their boundaries and their constituent populations, like for instance, when the USSR transitioned to a bunch of separate nations, how does this work? Like, do these nations kind of inherit their obligations from the previous governments they were part of? Jonathan?
Yeah, Jonathan, you might know more about this than me. I think basically they do, but there's some details.
It's this concept of a successor state, and so Russia's the sort of the successor state to the USSR in that sense. Whether other fragments like Kazakhstan, for example, inherit certain responsibilities, or whether they have to join separately, that I'm not clear about. We need the space lawyers to weigh in on that.
Fascinating. Well, it's going to be great to see people start suing each other and all these things in outer space, and see how that plays out in the various courts and international bodies. So interesting. So interesting. All right, let's see. So, okay, we're after 45 minutes, so we're officially not going to be mad at you if you sign off, but we're going to stay on for another 15 and just have discussions.
Maybe I'll just, I could say, to go back to the question that was asked, I think maybe it was John or was asking about or commenting on dust and the possibility that dust could, say, like reduce the effectiveness of another mission solar panels. And you could consider that like essentially a liability event. And there are, I was posting in the chat, there are several kind of like concepts in the Outer Space Treaty and obviously in international law more broadly about sort of like interactions between different operators or different entities. And these just have not been tested in space. It's not that they don't apply, it's that what that means in practice or how it extends to private actors in particular, it hasn't been figured out yet. So we will, as Koreans say, I'm not excited about people suing each other, but I do think that's going to, be what creates the case law for things going forward. That's kind of
better to sue each other than to start fighting, AKA.
Yes, well, that's true.
Sports series. Anyway, I'm curious. Oh, okay. We have Carol asking a question here. let's go to Carol's question. How does the Artemis Accord help define the legal framework, or does it?
So the Artemis Accords it's actually not, it's not a treaty. It is an agreement between partners of NASA's Artemis program. And so it's very interesting because it's been somewhat controversial in the international community because it was drafted by the United States, and then the United States approached countries that they wanted to partner with to sign on to it. The Artemis Accords does actually get a little bit more specific than the Outer Space Treaty, and so a lot of folks see it as an opportunity to implement sort of vague obligations that are contained in the Outer Space Treaty. But those who weren't necessarily invited to sign up can get kind of grumpy about it, arguing, I think, on some level, rightly so, that having a subset of nation states implementing agreements actually can land as sort of threatening to the Outer Space Treaty because it's not to all parties. And so if you have like a subgroup going off and implementing things on their own, what does that mean about those who are excluded?
Right.
I don't know. It's an implementation agreement rather than a treaty per se.
You know who the countries are that are part of the accord?
I don't have a full list off the top of my head, but it's the thing maybe worth commenting on is that it started off in the first year or so. It was like it was not major spacefaring countries that had signed on to it. And sort of increasingly, we then saw countries like Australia, Canada, just recently France signing on to it. And so you can see that these accords are gaining momentum, and they could eventually end up as down the road being seen as kind of like customary international law. But at the moment, they're a partnership agreement.
Hey, oh boy. Okay, we have a lot of stuff popping into here. So one more fun question I have for you, Jesse, as well as, well, I think I know Chris's answer to this, but still it might be fun to ask him. Would you go to the moon? Like if you had the opportunity to go to lunar orbit or on the surface of the moon, I mean, not permanently, presumably, like personally, is this something you care to consider, or are you happy to stay on Earth?
I would definitely go to the moon. I think it sounds great. I might. I think the thing I'd be most excited about in going to the moon would be something. It's not just sort of a 3-day joyride kind of thing, but I'd really love to go and do like a sort of 6-month, year-long stay that involved thinking about a kind of social political dynamics of an extended presence is something that is contributing to progressively sustained presence.
Oh, interesting. Okay. Well, look, it looks like Chris signed off, so we'll just have to assume he'd go.
No, Chris is there.
Oh, Chris is there. Would you go, Chris, or are you done with space travel?
So I served as an astronaut for 21 years and was in space for 6 months. So when you say, would you go, what you're really asking is, would you spend the next 7 years of your life inventing space flight, creating all of the technologies, testing them, proving them, improving your own skill set, contributing to exploration and mission definition? What is the purpose of going, and how are you going to overcome all of the incredible dangers to go successfully do it? The going is the easy part. The actual, all the work, that's the worthwhile and complex part. And so the answer is yes, but I've flown in space 3 times, so I've been lucky, but sure. But my question would be, what for, what in, and how am I going to contribute to that?
Hey, one more question to Jesse and anyone else, maybe Chris, since he's actually been there. The ISS is another example of kind of an international agreement and collaboration, and arguably very successful. I always felt that the ISS should somehow get the Nobel Peace Prize, because gosh knows how many wars it has prevented and is preventing at the present time. But that's just a side thing. It's like such a great example of international collaboration and good spirits, and as well as all the things that happened with the Russian scientists who started, were funded to work on the ISS instead of like go to Iran and build ballistic missiles. Let's talk about the ISS and how it relates to some of these other things like the moon and sorts of things. Any thoughts on that, Jesse or Chris or anyone?
Well, definitely, I think I should let Chris answer this because he was definitely the expert.
Yeah, so I was the commander of it, and I worked on it. I was NASA's director of space station operations or at least for the astronaut office for quite a while. And I was NASA's director in Russia for a few years as well. Space station is a tremendous initial example of how we can cooperatively settle the rest of the universe. And that may be, it does good science and it's good engineering. But I think the geopolitical precedent that it has set. I mean, we live by a different set of laws on the space station. We live by the International Crew Code of Conduct, not one country's laws. And even though all the mess is going on right now in Ukraine, the crew up there has Russians and Americans and a bunch of other countries that are working productively, daily, 24 hours a day, hand in hand. And they are a link between all 15 countries. So it's a terrific model for where we're going to, the surface of the moon next, and then what lies beyond that. And it's got its own limitations and constraints, but at the same time, there's an enormous amount to learn from the space station beyond just the technical.
Chris, one thing that you often say about, I'll just want to give one anecdote that Chris often mentioned, which is the fact that we talk about the importance of standards. And Chris, you've often pointed out that even on the space station, we have different plugs in the Russian module and the American module. And that involves bringing up adapters and other things. So, thinking ahead now, it's not too early to think about shared standards for them.
Yeah, little standards and, docking ports. Like most ships can only dock with a subset of the ports on the space station. The spacesuits aren't interchangeable. The airlocks aren't interchangeable. The plumbing in the toilets, that wasn't interchangeable. So different power standards. Is it positive ground or negative ground? Just basic stuff that didn't all get resolved before we put it together.
But some things must be standardized, like for instance, the electricity that comes out of the solar arrays and stuff like that feeds all these different things.
You need power converters and is it going to be 60 cycle or 50 cycle? And what's the voltage going to be? All that stuff, you need converters on board because the natural tendency is for people to go with what works for them and design that way.
Larry, I see that you run cut in.
Yeah. So the one thing we haven't really talked about yet is money. Who's going to pay for all this? And so I'm just wondering if there's anything in the Open Lunar, policy decisions that deal with that. I mean, would certain structures discourage or encourage economic development? And I mean, is there an interaction there?
It's a good question. I mean, I think maybe the most direct way that we address that is we try to look for and support discussion of policies or in just coordination agreements that increase the word is often confidence that any operator, private sector or government can have in terms of if you're making long-term plans, especially though if you're looking for investment. One of the things that becomes important is being able to say, well, if we're going to go to this location, we know that we can go to this location and we know what our rights are in this location. And we also know what it means to say operate sustainably on a lunar surface. So I think all of these things are related. Like being a good actor is related to also generating kind of economic interest. But I'll also say that we're sort of like within Open Lunar's, I guess, the things that we're advocating for, we're excited to see good and sort of responsible behavior on the moon. We're not objectively sort of trying to accelerate lunar activity, almost the equal. Although we're excited to see it happening, if that makes sense. So if it needs to go slower to be done more thoughtfully, I think that's okay too. And there's a balance to be struck there that is obviously worthy of a lot of discussion.
All right, folks, we are rapidly approaching the hour. We might have time for one more brief comment or something like that, but then I'm going to close it out. I'm a strong believer in the idea of leave them wanting more. So we'd prefer to end with people wishing it was longer than wishing it had been shorter. So I don't know, Jesse, do you have something last to say in the last minute or so?
Well, it's just really cool to see this group. I haven't joined the calls before, so I hope that I can join in subsequent ones and learn from everybody else. I also I'm noticing, Allison, you have your hand up, so I don't know if that's intentional or not, but maybe you wanted to say something.
Or just like a projection in the future, I'd be like super interested to hear. And like, I posted this thing on like colder wars, which is mostly about like space warfare, but it can be something that you're worried about on the long-term future, or an opportunity that you think is really exciting for collaboration. I'm not sure, but I think like a future outlook of like policy discussions, I would love your ideas on this.
Sorry, I didn't catch the question. Okay.
Well, just, there's a bunch, I think, on space war, I think, that I've recently kind of like brushed up on, and space war obviously terrifying. Maybe there's also an interesting opportunity for collaboration that, still stands down the line that we could, potentially look towards to or prepare for already, which is not necessarily war. I'm not sure, but are there any like specific events or milestones that, we may be able to hit or, collaborate?
Yeah. Well, something that we've been doing a little bit of thinking about recently that might not sound too sexy, but I think is really relevant to this is what tends to be referred to as situational awareness in outer space. We do an okay job of this around the Earth, but even around the Earth, the information like what, I don't know if Jonathan's still here, but information like what Jonathan does with Jonathan's space report is that's the best kind of open resource we have for objects that are in outer space. And as we begin to see more activity around the moon, kind of having transparency of action and having shared information about what's happening and shared versions of sort of truth, I think will be really important to underpin that cooperation and openness. And I don't really see anybody who's not working on it too much at the moment. So
okay, everybody's dropping off. People are dropping off now, so we're gonna close this out. Sorry I didn't get some of you for intros. That'll happen next time you're on board. You can remind me if you feel the need and I don't come to you. Thank you very much, Jesse.
Thank you, Priya.
Everybody else.
Thanks, Allison. Thanks for having me.